You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Goku. And this is our last show of the year 2021. Last year, this time, I was doing a show in reference to Kwanzaa. I was doing a show every day of Kwanzaa last year, this time. I didn't do it this year. But, it just shows you how time flies. That seems almost like yesterday. We're gonna do this show tonight on Pan-Africanism versus Pan-African Nationalism and Afrocentric Analysis. Before we get into the show, I see the pro-Black perspective is here saying we here. Appreciate you for coming through. Make sure you guys are tuned in. That is following all of us from KWAZ Radio on Twitter. We're doing a Twitter space tomorrow night hosted by the Pro-Black Perspective. And the concept of the space, the discussion is going to be along the lines of what do Africans need to do to build the next best nation? So I want to see the regulars from this show there. I want to see the regulars from the other shows there as well. Let's make it a big event. Let's finish out this year strong. Before we get into the paper, I want to remind you guys that this show is part of a podcast network, that you are being invited to tune into the other shows on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you're checking out those other shows. Subscribe to their YouTube channels. Follow them on social media. And Onitase has a Discord as well. Make sure you check out his Discord. I have one as well, too. You can see the link down in the description. All right. We got Tito District in the room saying, peace, everyone. This is going to be good. I appreciate that vote of confidence by Tito District. I just want to point out, too, I have a couple of community posts up. Some question of the days from the last couple of days. So you guys make sure to check out those community posts. Drop your comments. Let's hear what you got to say. Finally, before I start the show, just want to remind you guys that in this upcoming new Roman year, I have a personal thing about me. I like to add something new to me personally, right? And I tried to bring that to the show. This year, we added Shoot the Breeze on Saturday nights, which has been successful for this size platform. And in the new year, what I can tell you, actually starting next Thursday, I'm going to be doing that exclusive show over on the KWAZ Radio YouTube channel. I'm going to live stream a show over there on Thursday nights. So instead of coming here, you'll go over there. Make sure you subscribe to KWAZ Radio's YouTube channel. I'm going to be doing more short short content, like those 1-2 minute video content on YouTube as well on this channel. So look for that, where maybe every day or so I hop on and I talk about something real quick. And lastly, in this upcoming new Roman year, I'm trying to build a team. I'm trying to build a team, and what I need from that team is pretty simple. I need courageous people, brave, courageous people, dedicated to the idea of connecting groups of Africans all over the world. That's it. Dedicated to that, brave, bold, willing, able. That's what I need. We got some work to do in this new year. We gotta start holding Pan-Africanist and Pan-Africanism to a standard now. This ADOS FBA thing, that's a failure on Pan-Africanism's part, actually. You know, because at the end of the day, everyone wants some benefits, and everyone wants to see that, you know, collectively we can actually achieve something. Pan-Africanism has been a lot of talk, if we're being honest, and we don't have a system to hold it accountable. So let's change that a little bit. Let's be the ones to hold this thing accountable. Let's get off the rhetoric now. Let's actually build something. Let's do something, right? So I need people who are willing and able, who are dedicated to the idea of connecting peoples across the place to get something rolling. Let's get some tangible stuff. Because if you notice something with that movement in America, like a big part of that movement is about tangibles, right? Because people want to see something done. People want to see something done, and frankly, you know, the days of Garvey and the factories and the steamliners, no one here today saw that. Let's give people something to see, right? Let's give people something to see. Let's give people something to be a part of, that they could actually see the construction of something. So I'll step off the soapbox and I'll get into the paper. I know you guys are probably rolling your eyes like, why doesn't he just get to the paper? Pan-Africanism versus Pan-African nationalism and Afrocentric analysis. It is the contention of this writer, and this writer, by the way, is Kwame Nantambu from Kent State University. It is the contention of this writer that the historical struggle of African peoples has heretofore been analyzed within a Eurocentric, dysfunctional, ahistorical, and divisive context, thus culminating in the use of the concept of Pan-Africanism. This article suggests that in analyzing the struggle of African peoples from its proper historical, unifying, and holistic perspective, we must speak in terms of Pan-African nationalism and not Pan-Africanism. This is the Afrocentric approach. So here's a section called Eurocentric Pan-Africanism, a review. In thumbing through the pages of traditional analysis of Pan-Africanism, we find that W.E.B. Du Bois, for example, regards the Pan-African movement as an aid to the promotion of national self-determination among Africans under African leadership for the benefits of Africans themselves. The late integrationalist George Padmore asserts that the idea of Pan-Africanism first arose as a manifestation of fraternal solidarity among Africans and peoples of African descent. Brother Peter Olasanwush Esedeke, I don't know that person, suggested that Pan-Africanism is a political and cultural phenomenon which regards Africa, Africans, and their descendants abroad as a unit. Robert Chrisman also asserts that the Pan-African vision has at its basic premise that we, the people of African descent throughout the globe, constitute a common cultural and political community by virtue of our origin in Africa and our common racial, social, and economic oppression. It further maintains that political, economic, and cultural unity is essential among all Africans to bring about effective action for the liberation and progress of the African peoples and nations. Nkrumahist Stokely Carmichael, also originally later Kwame Ture, defines Pan-Africanism as the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, whereas John Henry Clark asserts that Pan-Africanism is about the restoration of African people to their proper place in world history, to facilitate and bring about the ingathering of African people throughout the world, and to restore what slavery and colonialism took away. You guys who are listening, either live on the playback, which of those definitions do you prefer? Rupert Emerson notes in Pan-Africanism that Pan-Africanism is the sense that all Africans have a spiritual affinity with each other, and that having suffered together in the past, they must march together into a new and brighter future. In its fullest realization, this would involve the creation of an African Leviathan in the form of a political organization or association of states. It might involve an almost infinite variety of regional groupings and collaborative arrangements, all partial embodiments of the counter-embracing unity, which is the dream of the true Pan-Africanist. It seems that what all the above-mentioned analysis lack is a correct definition of Pan-Africanism or the Pan-African movement in terms of revolutionary historical struggle. Instead, the movement is couched in emotional and political cultural platitudes. I actually agree with that. Like, what's really going on? What's really going on to change anything? Right? Simply put, it's just like emotional talk. You know? It seems that what all the above, as an addendum, Ali Mazrui, in his Africa's International Relations, The Diplomacy of Dependency and Change, further Europeanizes and compartmentalizes the struggle by distinguishing 5 dimensions or levels of Pan-Africanism: Sub-Saharan, Trans-Saharan, Transatlantic, West Hemispheric, and Global Pan-Africanism. His definitions are as follows. Sub-Saharan Pan-Africanism limits itself to the unity of Black people or Black countries south of the Sahara. Or it could be a commitment to limit solidarity to Black African countries, excluding both the Arab states and the Black people of the Americas. Trans-Saharan Pan-Africanism extends solidarity to those who share the African continent across the Sahara Desert, the Arabs and Berbers of the north. Right? How many of you are Trans-Saharan Pan-Africanists? Trans-Saharan Pan-Africanists. How many of you are that? Trans-Saharan Pan-Africanism insists on regarding the Great Desert as a symbolic bridge rather than a divide, a route for caravans rather than a death trap. Transatlantic Pan-Africanism is the 3rd level of solidarity, encompassing the peoples of the Black diaspora in the Americas as well as the African continent. One form of transatlantic Pan-Africanism limits itself to Black people and excludes the Arabs of North Africa. West Hemispheric Pan-Africanism encompasses West Indians, Black Americans, Black Brazilians, and other Black people of the Western Hemisphere. Global Pan-Africanism, this brings together all these centers of Black presence in the world and adds the new Black enclaves in Britain, France, and other European countries, which have come partly from the Caribbean and partly from the African continent itself. Right? So does any of those resonate with you guys who are listening here today? All right. By the way, I see there's a few people who joined us. Couple people joined us. We have Tito District earlier said very true. The learning curve is here. That's the revolutionary matron. She says Jambo. Teetums is here. Teetum says, what is Pan-African nationalism? Well, we're going to get to that, Teetums. Lucas Ferreira, our South American listener says, word up, my brothers. Tito District says, not me. I think she's referring to that Pan-Africanism that includes the Arabs and whatnot. Lucas says, quick visit to say hello, and I have to go. Peace. All right, Lucas. Peace to you. Hopefully you listen to the playback. Make sure if you're here listening to me, make sure you have the likes. Let's make sure the likes are matching the number of listeners, all right? Let's get the likes up. Trigger Happy 262 Plus says, it's always kind of funny to me about the sub-Saharan Pan-African distinction. But isn't the whole point of the objective of unifying black people an exclusive thing for black people? That's how I look at it. Thank you, Trigger Happy 262, for being here today. The pro-black perspective says they usually say continental versus racial, but trans-Saharan is an interesting way of saying continental. I agree with that too, Oni. I actually agree with that. I find that was interesting. Tedum says, I'm a black nationalist Pan-African. All right, Tedums. All right, you're a black nationalist Pan-African. Okay. The pro-black perspective says racial is what I'd say. Tedum says, would that be a Pan-African nationalist? Tedums also says right there, Pops is looking for me right now. Tedums also says they are racist, anti-black, and our first historical enemy. That I agree with as well. Right? Let's continue with the paper. The problem inherent in Mazrui's 1977 microanalysis of Pan-Africanism is that it perpetuates the European divide and conquer maneuver. It not only deletes the vital revolutionary variable in the struggle, but more important, it also disintegrates the Pan-African movement. The Pan-African struggle should not limit itself to any geographically dispersed or dislocated African peoples or their descendants. To do this is to play into the hands of the colonizer, thus enhancing the colonizer's continued control and exploitation of us. Our specific geographic dispersal came about by the design, not the accident of slavery. Our African ancestors had no input into selecting the final destination where they would labor as slaves for more than 3 centuries. Ergo, where they resisted European slavery is not more important than the fact that they did indeed resist and revolt against slavery wherever they were. It is a sine qua non. Therefore, we see ourselves as an absolute and constantly struggling African people with an African past punctuated by European hegemonic exploitation, oppression, slavery, and colonialism. So I get what the brother's saying here. Like, don't make it a geographic thing. Just make it a thing where we're all Africans, regardless to where we are, right? And we've all had this struggle, you know, we've all gone up against exploitation, oppression, slavery, colonialism, and the like. And so what I'm guessing the brother is going to go through is to say, you know, we're not focusing on where the boat dropped us off because we didn't have no choice in that. You know, we didn't have a choice in that, so we're not going to focus on that. We're just going to focus on the overall struggle, the overall African struggle, right? And I get that. And to add what Oni said in the chat, you know, along racial lines, along the fact that we are black Africans at that. It is indeed both counterproductive and divisive to analyze the Pan-African movement going from the specific to the general, microanalysis, instead of scientifically and historically going from the general to the specific, the macroanalysis. In other words, we should first analyze the totality of the Pan-African nationalist struggle against Europeanization. That is, African peoples resisting and struggling against Europe's slave intruders and foreign conquerors in Africa in general, and then look at the more specific areas of geographic regions where resistance occurred in particular. If we were to look initially at the specific areas or regions where resistance occurred, we would psychologically fall into the trap of comparing one degree or method of resistance with another. We would also tend to be more taken up in our own personal idiosyncrasies, eventually losing sight of the common denominators. European slavery, Euro-colonialism, and foreign aggression into Mother Africa. So I think this answers Tatum's. Was it Tatum's? I think it was Tatum's who asked. I think this should answer your question of what it really means per se. Right? Let's worry about what has happened to Africa. The larger issue is Africa versus, well, they're painting as Africa versus Europe, but we could expand that personally and say Africa versus the Eurasians, the African versus the Eurasians. Right? Let's understand that. Let's not spend time looking at the things done in the smaller geographic areas, because that's how you get the ADOS, FBA. That's how you get the Caribbean who thinks they're better than everyone else. That's how you get the Nigerian or other continental Africans who think that they're better than everyone else, because you lost sight of the fact that it's not about comparison with other Africans. It's about laser focus on this Eurasian, I want to thank everyone who's here tonight, too, by the way. In further analyzing variations of the same Pan-African theme, James N. Karaoke in 1974 indicates that at its inception, Pan-Africanism was racially inspired. Thus, Pan-Africanism was a racially conscious movement born outside of Africa. Former President Julius K. Nyerere, 1974, of Tanzania, also lends credence to the racial inception of Pan-Africanism when he postulates that the Pan-African movement was born as a reaction to racialism. Right? I think we could all agree that that's true. Right? Trigger Happy 262 says, I haven't read this paper in a minute, but I feel like one component it forgot is the integrationist origins of the term Pan-Africanism and how it was completely different from the Garveyite strain of African unity. In fact, there is actually another socialist strain that criticizes Pan-Africanism overarching idea of African unity. They call themselves African internationalists. Tatum says yes. Tatum says he agrees with Trigger Happy. There's a paper that I almost did from Karanga that asks the question, if I could find it. There's this paper from Karanga, from Maulana Ron Karanga, the guy who created Kwanzaa, that asks the question, which road, nationalism, Pan-Africanism, or socialism? So with regards to what Trigger Happy said, I might do that paper next Tuesday so that we can have a conversation about it, right? Tatum says, it's my critique of Nkrumah, married a non-black woman and was trying to unify with Egypt when he should have married a sister and united West Africa regionally first before branching out. That's nothing but the truth right there. Nothing but the truth right there. Right? So we reach a section called Pan-Africanism, reaction to 15th century European exploitation. At the outset, let me state quite unequivocally that the Pan-African movement or struggle was not born as a reaction to racialism. If we were to accept such a dogmatic conclusion, then we would be using a Eurocentric, ahistorical, and disjunctive analysis of our absolute African struggle. We would logically be succumbing to the traditional micro approach that Pan-Africanism began in 1900, when Henry Sylvester Williams, a Trinidadian lawyer, had the parochial conviction that the problems of black folk in England were largely based on racism. The year 1900 is not the beginning of the absolute African struggle. To suggest that the genesis of the Pan-African movement occurred in 1900 is a historical and geopolitical misconception and is due to the conceptual incarceration of African and Black scholars who engage in a Eurocentric analysis of the Pan-African national struggle. Another factor that must be borne in mind is that European slavery was predicated on the making and accumulation of profit. Economics was the primary motive behind slavery. Racial overtones were secondary, as Eric Williams, 1961, proves quite clearly. Slavery was an economic institution of the first importance. The origin of Negro slavery was economic, not racial. It had to do not with the color of the labor, but the cheapness of the labor. As compared with Indian and white labor, Negro slavery was eminently superior. In each case, it was a survival of the fittest. Both Indian slavery and white servitude were to go down before the black man's superior endurance, docility, and labor capacity. The features of the man, his hair, color, dentifrice, his subhuman characteristics so widely pleaded, were only the latter rationalizations to justify a simple economic fact that the colonies needed labor and resorted to Negro labor because it was the cheapest and the best. Well, what do you guys say and feel about that? What former Prime Minister of Trinidad, Eric Williams, put out there? Right? What are your feelings about that statement? I'd like to actually wait a second for you guys to post your thoughts, because I know there's a delay between when I read something when you hear it. So I'll actually like to wait around and hear what you guys have to say. How does that resonate with you? I'll read it again, as a matter of fact, while you post your thoughts. Slavery was an economic institution of the first importance. Origin of Negro slavery was economic, not racial. It had to do not with the color of the laborer, but the cheapness of the labor. As compared with Indian and white labor, Negro slavery was eminently superior. In each case, it was a survival of the fittest. Both Indian slavery and white servitude were to go down before the black man's superior endurance, docility, and labor capacity. The features of the man, his hair, color, dentifrice, his subhuman, quote-unquote, subhuman characteristics, so widely pleaded, were only the latter rationalizations to justify simple economic fact that the colonies needed labor and resorted to Negro labor because it was cheapest and best. I'm going to continue, and then I'll read your comments when I hit the next section. The African nationalists, slaves, therefore resisted European economic exploitation as embodied by slavery, not racialism. Because slavery was initially based on economics and class struggle, it is historically incorrect to conclude that the Pan-African nationalist movement was born as a reaction to racialism. Indeed, several authors have also accepted the historical truism that Pan-Africanism began in the 15th century. Clark, in 1973, for example, suggests that during the latter half of the 15th century, European nationalism was reflected in the expansion of trade in both slaves and manufactured goods. The story of the African slave trade is essentially the story of the consequences of the rise of Europe. With the opening of the New World during the latter part of the 15th century, the Europeans started to expand beyond their homeland into the broader world. They were searching for new markets, new materials, new manpower, and new land to exploit. The African slave trade was created to accommodate this expansion. The Europeans, mainly the Portuguese, came to the west coast of Africa in the 15th century, became the first conquerors of African slaves. The first conquerors of African slaves. Is that true? I saw I tuned back to the chat and I saw the comment from the pro-black perspective, And it's exactly what I'm thinking. It's exactly what I'm thinking. And I'm so sick of that shit now. Let me read the comments so you'll understand what the hell I'm talking about. The pro-black perspective earlier said, yeah, shame how Nkrumah's descendants turned out. Tatum says, a damn shame. Trigger Happy 262 Plus says, to extend on that, some Gaviites alleviate this ideological conflict by calling themselves African fundamentalists, African nationalists, or universal African nationalists. And my guess would be that the term Pan-African nationalist is just a derivative of African nationalists, and also because Pan-Africanism is more popular of a term for the idea of African unity. I like that, actually. Trigger Happy. Yeah, I could get with some of that. Tito District said disagree to that blurb I read. Pro-black perspective said exactly what I was thinking when I was reading it, bragging about being used. I can't stand that. But you know, the Indian in them was too weak and we was stronger. Come on. White boy was too weak and Trigger Happy 262 Plus says, I think this is the fundamental foundation of how socialists conceptualize and analyze the understandings of racism. While Western racism has its particular distinctions, we cannot exclude the worldview of the European, as it was fundamental to making this capitalist structure and racial system. Also, socialism doesn't solve racism as seen by Cuba, absolutely. But some socialists would argue different. Right? Yeah, I agree with that. Tito District says, to Trigger Happy, true. The Learning Curve says Victim Olympics. Yeah, that's what that... Let me continue. Let me continue. In looking at the rise of Pan-Africanism, Vincent Bakpetu Thompson, in 1969, concludes that African nationalism and resistance movements and organizations sought to restore the status and freedom of Africans in Africa, as well as those of the diaspora, who have constantly struggled to rise from centuries of degradation and dehumanization that began with the transatlantic slave trade, a trade based on labor shortages on the plantations of the Caribbean and the Americas. Henry Winston analyzes Pan-Africanism in terms of class struggle and suggests that Pan-Africanism is, quote, is part of the international proletariat struggle against imperialism and has its roots in a class phenomenon, the oppression of African labor by international capitalism. 15th century, as cited by Chrisman. Chrisman in 1973 also indicates that the vision of effective united action, which characterizes Pan-African nationalistic thought, originates from the systemic dispersal and oppression of African peoples for the last 500 years through slavery and transnational capitalism. It was precisely the capture and uprooting of millions of Africans and the conditions of slavery which laid the foundations for Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism in the United States and the West Indies. Walter Rodney, in 1976, on the other hand, provides a linkage overview of Pan-Africanism by insisting that, quote, it is in the Caribbean that Pan-African sentiments were born, because the Caribbean is the first area of the world to which Africans were taken to labor as slaves, and then immediately thereafter to the rest of the Americas. It is in that context that the very necessity to define oneself as an African, if one came from the African continent, arose. Prior to that, it was historically irrelevant. Someone in the African continent would see himself in terms of his particular ethnic group, or clan, or village, or family group. There was no necessity for him or her to be defined as an African. What mattered was the locality or particular social formation in which that person was located. But having made contact with Europe and having made a particular type of contact based on the exploitation of black by white, it is in that situation that the necessity arose for black people to be defined as black. Although for most of us, Pan-Africanism means a series of congresses and conferences, we should reflect on some aspect of slavery so that we might get a handle of the essence of Pan-Africanism at that point in time when it was born in substance, even if it was not so regarded, even if the terminology was not applied to the substance. Pan-Africanism is something we must define and struggle. What is essential to the African slave struggle is the common experience of exploitation and oppression and the unity which the slaves forged, commonality which could only be operative when they moved against European exploitation and oppression. It was not an academic question, it was a question of survival. Do we move against the slave master? Do we eat? And you know, that's the question for today, right? Do we move against the slave master? Do we even ameliorate the conditions of slavery? And to do so, it was necessary to break down the intradistinctions between one African and another. That, to my mind, is the essence of Pan-Africanism in the period when it was born, 15th century. And it had to be born in a context where a large number of Africans from different social backgrounds were thrown into a context in which this necessity would arise. As a continuing trend, Pan-Africanism has validity in struggle, and it has validity in the struggle against the capitalist exploitation, or Europeanism. Let us now turn on an Afrocentric analysis of Pan-African nationalism. So this is where we're going to talk about Pan-African nationalism itself and this Afrocentric analysis. Let me check in with the chat room real quick. Trigger Happy 262 Plus says, Statidums, yeah, I think another thing, and Krumah didn't realize, is that Pan-Arabism is not compatible to Pan-Africanism. It's like a universalist blind spot in a way. Uwa Bantum, I haven't seen Uwa Bantum in a minute. Uwa Bantum number 2 says, Hotep Jambo Falmi. Garvey had the idea of a royal convention of indigenous kingdoms and tribes who sought out their civilization. Pan-Africanism had their own congresses seeking a change in management. He goes on to say Garvey essentially is a personification and organizer of the Black Berlin conferences. You know what I'd like you guys to do? If you're listening to my voice, I don't care if you're here live with me or you're listening to the playback, drop your definition of Pan-Africanism. Because one of the things I keep seeing bandied about is there is no working definition. There is no one working definition of Pan-Africanism. Why is that? Let me tell you something. If you don't have your shit defined, how can people become adherents? Solid adherents at that. Right? So some of you guys who are here today live, put together what you think is your most solid definition of Pan-Africanism. Right? And let's talk about it at the end. All right? Before I get into this next section of the paper, I want to do a station ID break, and then I want to talk about something very important, and then we'll continue with this part of the paper, the Pan-African nationalism, the Afrocentric analysis. So let's do a station ID break. We'll be back on the other side.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is W.E.B with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to check out all the shows on KWAZ Radio. And if you have a voice, you have an idea for a show that you think is absolutely needed on the network, by all means, shoot the network an email. Let them know what your show idea is and that you want to host a show, right? And by all means, I'm sure you'll get an answer, right? One thing I want to talk about too, because on this Saturday coming is Shoot the Breeze. And as you guys know, I have a Discord, and on the Discord you can post your prompts to Shoot the Breeze. And I noticed a reduction this week. And I just want to say this. One of the things we gotta do a little bit better with is, if you have an ideological disagreement, right? This is something I'd like to see from us going forward. If you have an ideological disagreement about something, don't let that, or stop letting that stuff stop you from participating in the conversations, in the work that's being done, etc. Right? And I'm saying this because I noticed something in particular, right? Don't let that stuff stop you from the work or being participant. I think there's something that goes on in these struggles where if your word isn't, or your thoughts aren't accepted, you know, are disregarded or what have you, I think people tend to shy away. But that doesn't help us. That doesn't help us, right? Don't be afraid to step out there, speak your piece. If others disagree, they disagree, right? You come back stronger or what have you, but it shouldn't stop you from being participant. And I want our folks to get off of that stuff too, right? I see Nefere is in the room saying peace. Edom says Fanon fell for that nonsense as well, right? But be participant. Don't let any little disagreements stop you from doing what you got to do. And again, for those of you who came in late, just a reminder from the top of the show, I'm looking to build a team this year. This coming Roman New Year, I'm looking to build a team that's serious about producing results now. A lot of what we're seeing is we're talking all the time and no one's actually, putting something together. Let's put something together. Let's get something rolling, so that folks can see that work is being done. If folks don't see where work is being done, folks don't fuck with it. Just keeping it real today. The last show of 2021. If folks can't see where work is being, folks ain't gonna mess with it. Go ask Umar Johnson now. When Umar had that $750,000 and folks for years wasn't seeing nothing happening, folks stopped messing with the dude. And by the way, Umar is supposed to be Pan-African too. But if you listen to Umar as of late, Umar's on some whole ADOS type thing, but still talking Pan-Africanism. Let's get serious. So all I need is a few dedicated, bold, courageous types. Join the team, and let's get it done. And lastly, I have the Discord. The Discord is going to be, I'm going to change up the Discord. I have this thing about me, I don't like lurkers. I don't like folks who are not participant, who are not adding something. So I'm going to change how that's done too. And we're going to start whittling down to people who are actually providing something, actually providing PDF books or providing some updated information, or, you know, who are asking to help with certain things on the Discord, etc. We got to start getting things done. We can't have people just sitting down lurking and all that. Which reminds me, tomorrow night again, Onitase will be hosting a Twitter Spaces all about what do Black folks need to do to build the next powerful nation, right? To build the next powerful nation. And you guys should come through, and please don't come through and keep quiet, right? We learned that in the last Twitter Spaces. Come through, participate. Let's have a dope-ass conversation, all right? A few people said something. BB Rodriguez says salute to the host. Thank you, BB. I appreciate you. The House Reality Podcast says war with God. He said that's the cocoa we've been looking for. You know, I'm trust me, I'm going to be back to that person in this upcoming Roman New Year. If you guys don't know, the war on God was a title of an episode I did some years ago, back before I started reading these papers every episode. That you guys should check out. I'll try to post it on the community tab if I could remember, or at the end of this video. But yeah, that's something I'm looking to get back to this coming year. Anyway, back to the paper, Pan-African Nationalism, Afrocentric Analysis. This article argues that the correct historical struggle by African peoples against foreign or external aggression, exploitation, occupation, domination, and so forth did not begin with the European contact with or incursion into Mother Africa in the 15th century. African peoples have resisted several disparate foreign invaders, including those whom today we call Europeans, thousands of years before the 15th century. In the BC era, African peoples in ancient Kemet, or Egypt, resisted and fought against the following foreign invaders and conquerors: Hyksos, or Shepherd Kings, in 1783 BC, the Syrians, now known as the Syrians, in 666 BC, Persians, now known as the Iranians, in 552 BC and 343 BC, Greeks, the world's first Europeans, under Alexander the Great in 332 BC, Romans, Europeans in 30 BC, Arabs in 642 AD, Turks in 1517 AD, French Europeans under Napoleon Bonaparte on May 19th, 1798, British Europeans in 1881. The above information not only destroys the historically held notion that the history of the African people's struggle began in the 15th century, but it also proves quite convincingly that African peoples have fought against both European and non-European foreign invaders since ancient times. This then relegates the Eurocentric analysis of the African people's struggles to the ash heap of history. This then relegates Eurocentric analysis of the African people's struggle to the ash heap of history. From an Afrocentric perspective, therefore, we must conclude then that based on the above irrefutable evidence, the first recorded Pan-African nationalist unification among African peoples occurred around 3200 BC, when the pharaoh Aha, also known as Narmer and renamed Menes by the Greeks, he was the first historic ruler of the first dynasty in Kemet, united Upper and Lower Kemet into one nation, and located the capital city in Men Nefer, later called Memphis by the Greeks. This was an act of Pan-African nationalism of the first order, the unification of the Upper Nile and the Lower Nile together as a whole to form one country under one rule or dynasty to be able to resist foreign aggression and invasion inter alia. This then is the true historical, functional, unifying, and holistic representation of the struggle of African peoples. As such, we must speak in terms of Pan-African nationalism, Eurocentric, and not Pan-African nationalism, Afrocentric, which is Afrocentric, and not Pan-Africanism, Eurocentric. You know, that has been making some rounds on the internets lately too. That Pan-Africanism is a tool. That Pan-Africanism is some tool of it's some Eurocentric tool or something like that. So again, that's something to kind of flesh out a little bit more in the future. Pan-African nationalism was born as a reaction to struggle, and that unified struggle did not begin in the 15th century, but circa 3200 BC. This brings us to a session called Pan-African Nationalism, a conceptual definition. Remember, guys, to post your definitions. I'll read them at the end of the show. Post your definitions of what Pan-Africanism is to you, and I'll read those at the end of the show. Again, thanks to all of you who tuned in for the last show of the 2021 year. So Pan-African nationalism, a conceptual definition. Pan-African nationalism is a nationalistic, unified struggle or resistance of African peoples against all forms of foreign aggression and invasion in the fight for nationhood or nation building. The primary goal of Pan-African nationalism is the total liberation and unification of all African peoples under African communalism. Pan-African nationalism seeks to achieve African nationhood and nationality, human perfectibility based on the 7 cardinal principles or virtues of Ma'at. See, that's something, and who actually, was it W.E.B who said it? I think it was W.E.B from the House Rate Parker, or it could have been Oni who said it, or both. That you would rarely hear Ma'at come up in discussions of, like when we talk about nationhood and power, you know, African power, you rarely hear Ma'at come up. And I find that interesting too, right? Self-reliance, self-determination, the creation of Pan-African national solidarity and co-fraternity among all African peoples on the continent and in the diaspora. A cooperative, humanistic, and communal value system, spirituality, traditional extended family modus vivendi, and polycentrism. As a corollary, it also seeks to relocate, redirect, reorient, and reposition African peoples to their original historical reference locus in ancient Kemet during the BC era. All right, that paragraph is a lot to break down. And again, if you guys are not on the Discord, you can join the Discord and you can reach out to me if you want a copy of this paper as well. From an Afrocentric perspective, then, there are 4 major historical periods of Pan-African nationalism. First period of unification was characterized by resistance against foreign invasions and dynastic governance or nation building in the BC era in ancient Kemet. The second period was characterized by continued resistance against foreign invasions into ancient Kemet at the dawn of the 80 era and beyond, coterminous with the development of religion, culture, civilization, educational systems, nationhood, governance, and social norms or customs by Africans. Under Gibraltaric, the Rock of Gibraltar in Europe, which means Spain, because you're talking about the Moors, from 711 to 1485 AD. The third period, from the 15th to the 19th century, was a period of revolutionary Pan-African nationalism that was characterized by physical resistance against being captured as slaves on the continent. by slave revolts in the Americas led by Nat Turner, Samuel Sharp, Paul Coffey, Denmark Vesey, Cujo, Jack Dessalines, Henry Christophe, Toussaint Louverture, Nani Akompong, Joseph Cinque, and Prince Hall against European dehumanization, or the African Holocaust, and by ideological concepts championed by Bishop Henry McNeill Turner, Martin Delaney, Alexander Grummel, Henry Highland Garnet, David Walker, and Edward Wilmot Blyden. The fourth period was characterized by the intellectual, geopolitical, scientific, and cultural Pan-African nationalism of the 20th century, as exemplified by W.E.B. Du Bois, Henry Sylvester Williams, and Joseph Casely Hayford, Kwame Nkrumah, Maurice Bishop, George Padmore, Peter Abrams, Samora Machel, C.L.R. James, Jomo Kenyatta, Marcus Garvey, Walter Rodney, Steve Biko, Malcolm X, T.R. McConnell, and Peter Milliard, Franz Fanon, Tom Mboya, Kwame Ture, and James Baldwin, Sterling Brown, Claude McKay, Richard Wright, Amy Cesare, Amilcar Cabral, Leopold Senghor, Leon Damas, Langston Hughes, Rayford Logan, and Alan Locke. They also say see figure 1. I guess we'll get to that later. By the way, if you're talking curriculum, which I've been talking about a lot, which is what the Discord was intended to be, but there's not enough people volunteering. If you're talking curriculum, this little section of this paper is not a bad section to kind of build your history lessons around, to be honest, right? Not a bad area to build your history lessons around. To continue. Revolutionary Pan-African nationalists are individuals whose deeds not only seek to challenge and destroy the European power structure and political control intent, but also to serve as a positive, potent, liberative tool for African peoples. Intellectual Pan-African nationalists are those persons whose intellectual works and problem-solving research advance the analytical course to achieve liberation. Geopolitical Pan-African nationalists consist of those unique individuals who adopt a macro, global linkage approach to the liberation struggle. Those who regard and stress the evolution is a science are scientific Pan-African nationalists. Cultural Pan-African nationalists are individuals whose works, A, focus on negritude, the African personality, and culture as tools of liberation, B, challenge and expose existing oppressive Eurocentric social norms and status quo, and C, seek to return or relocate African people to their original cultural heritage. So that's an interesting look. If you are Pan-African, if you're a Pan-Africanist, which one are you? Right? Which one are you? So this is the table that they have here, basically, that broke down the different periods of Pan-African nationalism mentioned before. I won't go over this again, but this is just a diagram showing those periods that I read off earlier. Again, if you want a copy of the paper, join the Discord, look me up. I'll give you the paper, no problem. All right. Uwa Bantum number 2 says African imperialism equals Garveyism. He took the trappings of empires from dukes to knights and Kandaki. NYC Sports Archives is here saying greetings. Kevin Carre 42 says hello. NYC Beauty says finally here. Well, I'm glad you guys are here. We're at the conclusion of this paper, actually. But all the same, I'm glad you guys are here. Make sure you guys hit the like button. And if you came in late, by all means, listen to the playback. It's helpful to you and to me. Right? Listen to the playback. In this article, this is the conclusion now. In this article, I have decoded the Eurocentric analysis of the African liberation struggle. What is needed now is for African peoples to go through the process of Afrocentrification or Afrocentric global re-education using the African-centered curriculums so that we will thus be able to cure ourselves of the deadly disease of Afro-sclerosis, that miseducation, Eurocentric analysis, and the Urugu virus have inflicted on us. I actually like that Afro-sclerosis. That's cool. We must realize that our history did not begin in Jamestown in the United States in 1619, but in Mother Africa in the BC era, or in the admonition of Sheikh Anta Diop, quote, "The history of Black Africa will remain suspended in air, cannot be written correctly until African historians dare to connect it with the history of Egypt." You know, when I had Cambon on, Obadale Cambon on, that's one of the things he was trying to do actually in that conversation. I know the audio's not great, but you can still make out what's going on. But that's exactly what he was trying to do too, by the way. Africans are the original peoples with original ideas, and failure to analyze the struggle for liberation by African peoples within this historical, functional, holistic, and unifying Afrocentric context is tantamount to a fatal derailment of our rich, powerful, and glorious African ancestral nationalistic timeline. That's the end of the paper tonight. Final episode of 2021 in the books. Well, thank you guys for being here. Like I said at the start of the show, I personally try to add something to myself, some skill or what have you to my life. I also do that with this podcast. And other things related to Afrocentricity, Pan-Africanism. And so you'll see in the new year, you'll see some changes with different things tied to the show. The Discord is going to change. Some sections will just be completely removed. We're going to seek out more interactions from folks on the Discord. The way I do the show in the new year is going to change as well. And you're going to see that with several of the shows on KWAZ Radio also. On this show, because I have the ability to use this broadcasting software where I could drop a link and pull in people, I'm going to do more of that this coming year. Trying to get more folks to come in and add their thoughts and voices to what's being discussed. Like we had Tatum's here today, dropping some ideas. We had Trigger Happy 262 plus dropping some ideas. Uwa Bantuum dropping some ideas. So that's the kind of thing I'm going to push for more in the new year. I want to thank you guys for helping me out. I want to thank you guys for sticking around, making this show better through the Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze. And I promise that we'll do more of the same and even better in this upcoming Roman New Year. Pro-Black Perspective also like that Afro-sclerosis line. I actually love that. I got to figure out how to use that and something going forward. So yeah, so that's it for tonight. Make sure you guys are checking out the other shows. Make sure you guys are checking out the merch, the KWAZ Radio merch store. The link is down in the description. And make sure you guys are ready to put in some work in the new year. I'll see you guys tomorrow night in the Twitter Spaces hosted by the Pro-Black Perspective on Twitter. And I'll see you back here for the first night of the new year, the Roman New Year, on Saturday. If you guys are on the Discord, if you're not on the Discord, join. If you're on the Discord, post your Saturday Night Shoot the Breeze topics. Don't worry about whether someone is going to disagree with your take or whatever. Go ahead and post them. Let's have these conversations, right? Anyway, guys, until next time, you guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.